The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a program we have for you today. The big news from our friendly neighbors to the north in Canada last night, a Liberal landslide in the Canadian election. Justin Trudeau will be Canada's next Prime Minister after leading the Liberal Party to what for many was a surprising majority government win. The Conservative Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, was looking for his fourth consecutive mandate. Not happening. He is stepping down as party leader. This is going to be the second time for Canada to be led by a Trudeau. The 43-year-old Trudeau follows the footsteps of his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was prime minister for almost 16 years before retiring in 1984. Canadians, he said, sent a clear message that, quote, "It's time for change in this country, my friends. Real change." He spoke to his supporters in Calgary. Stephen Harper spoke to supporters in Calgary, made no mention about his political future, but he did say the people are never wrong, accepting the results of the election, not like he really had much of a choice, and many defeats for the Conservative Party, several cabinet ministers, a number of local officials, and the Liberal Party, a total reversal, Lewis, of recent political fortunes. They were crushed in Canada in 2011. Only 36 seats they had control of after that 2011 election. A big change. And now the Liberals have 184 ridings where they were elected or leading. Just a huge shakeup.
I'm happy for the Canadians, right? This is kind of a big deal. And now, well, I guess the prime minister is a bit of a goofball, it seems, but still a lot better than the guy who was in there before, or so I've heard.
What was the voter turnout as of this morning? 68.49%. Now let's contextualize that. Consider how rural 80% of Canada is. 80% of the population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. And they still had way higher voter turnout than in the United States, which I'll remind you in 2012 was 57.5%. 68% isn't even some overwhelming huge voter turnout, but it is still 20% higher than we had in the United States in the last election. We need higher voter turnout here. It will help Liberals. Just go vote. Rural Canada, overwhelmingly rural Canada, has managed a 20% higher voter turnout than the United States.
It's great. I'm not sure how they really got people to do that. I've said before that we need to make it easier for people to vote here. The way in which we vote and the times that it happens, the places it happens, it can be so much easier.
So let's talk a little bit about possible changes under the Liberal government and also some concerns from progressives about what is to come. Possible changes we could see under this new Liberal government. Tax increases for the top 1%, combined with maybe tax cuts for the Canadian middle class. A crackdown on tax shelters and tax havens. Changes to C-51. C-51 is this controversial anti-terrorism bill in Canada. Maybe some progress on marijuana legalization, adding capital to transportation and infrastructure, maybe some progress on euthanasia, increasing funding for the CBC, increasing college student grants, and maybe reinstating some of the protections for natural resources like lakes and forests. Stephen Harper, the now outgoing prime minister, removed many of those. So that's on the what we might see change side. Possible concerns from progressive Canadians. I was tweeting with a bunch of progressive Canadians this morning. Phil wrote in, he responded to me saying, the Liberal Party has a tradition of running from the left and governing from the right once they're in power. They supported the current surveillance law. They will likely support TPP. In contrast, their more progressive opponents had plans for national daycare and pharmacare. An anonymous tweeter from Quebec said, "Remember when Obama replaced Bush and everything was supposed to change? Canada had that moment. There isn't that much difference between Harper and Trudeau. besides meaningless social issues like pot. Shitagi wrote to me saying, after what we went through for the last 10 years, I can't think of anything that will be worse for progressives off the top of my head. And lastly, Teresa writing in saying, progressives lost. Liberals are more central. I don't trust them, but I'm cautiously hopeful that they will make some change. So, Lewis, not all progressives thrilled about this, generally recognizing that it is a move in the right direction, but some skeptical that it is a very drastic move.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, despite having a conservative controlled government, compared to the United States, Canada was still extremely liberal, right? I mean, it's like a completely different, you have to look at it through a different prism. So I don't really know what to say about it. I mean, how far to the left do Canadians really want to go?
All right, we will continue to cover it. If you are Canadian, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, send me your thoughts about yesterday's election results. We've been seeing significant escalation of violence in Israel. People have written in suggesting I comment on what peace would look like in Israel. What do I imagine a peace deal looking like? It's been over a year and a half since we last discussed this, so I think it's worth revisiting today. Let's issue a disclaimer, Lewis. I don't believe we are close to real peace negotiations today in Israel, partially because both sides want the other side to agree to preconditions that neither side is keen on doing. Although it is possible that negotiations are happening behind closed doors with some of those preconditions that if they don't have to be announced publicly, there's probably more willingness to grant some preconditions. But let's imagine for now that negotiations could really happen in earnest. What would a deal have to look like? Now, some people will hear my take on this, Lewis, and say, oh, it's too pro-Palestinian and it gives too much to terrorist organization Hamas. Others will hear what I'm going to say and say it sounds too pro-Israeli. I'm trying to think about this as pragmatically as possible. What would realistically have to happen? And there are three categories to look at for this deal. The politics, who's in charge, the security situation involving the Gaza blockade, and the borders. What borders would be part of what I see as a pragmatic deal? Lewis, if I may, let's start with politics. And I think you know what priority number one is for me when it comes to the politics of this.
As always, it's going to be Bibi, right?
Absolutely. Netanyahu must go. Whether it's a resignation, whether it's another election that needs to take place to oust Benjamin Netanyahu, even more moderate governments than Netanyahu's have not been able to achieve peace. And the current right-wing government, which is a coalition government of Benjamin Netanyahu involving some extreme religious right-wing elements, they have no credibility at this point to really achieve peace. So Benjamin Netanyahu, he hypothetically could be involved in some kind of productive peace process, but he has been so beholden to the extreme elements of the Israeli Knesset that it would be best for all if Netanyahu goes. On the Palestinian side, Hamas must be replaced by a more secular Palestinian authority immediately. Does Mahmoud Abbas have a role to play there, who's currently overseeing the West Bank? Yeah, I'm open to that. Hamas certainly isn't, though, having assassinated Fatah members in recent years. And Mahmoud Abbas recently gave this just lie-riddled speech at the United Nations. But to the extent that Mahmoud Abbas might be a productive partner, I'm open to him being involved in what must be some kind of secular Palestinian authority that would be in charge. Now, for practical purposes, we should be open to a unity government on paper, which might have some representative elements from Hamas, a demilitarized Hamas that I will get to, merely, Lewis, because there are people who want to see Hamas represented, at least on paper, but the Hamas of today as it stands cannot really be a part of future peace deals.
Yeah, they're just so embedded over there. I mean, how do you really deal with that? And people have been bamboozled into thinking that Hamas has their best interest at heart and that Hamas is protecting them. it's the reality is far from that.
The law of return for Jews to Israel must be maintained if we are going to really make progress on a peace deal. The entire point of Israel is that since Jews are discriminated against and have been kicked out of so many parts of the world over the last several thousand years, this is a place Jews know they can go to, period. As long as that's maintained in the context of a two-state solution, I don't care about calling it a, quote, Jewish state, in spite of that being sort of the original point. That's very important to some. That wouldn't be a requirement for me as long as we maintain a two-state solution sort of paradigm with the law of return. Now, the Palestinian law of return for Palestinians to return to Israel has to also be conceded, but not for 5 million Palestinians. It's just not going to happen. So I think a more reasonable alternative that makes sense and will also be connected to the blockade being released is that anyone who wants to move back to Gaza or the West Bank is free to do so if the eventual Palestinian Authority wants to allow it. It would be their choice. Their sovereignty would dictate that decision. In the past, Ehud Barak, for example, suggested a symbolic number of Palestinians to return to Israel and otherwise significant financial reparations. Practically speaking, Lewis, I think that's going to have to be it.
Yeah, well, it's a great plan you've outlined. I mean, as soon as those in power on both sides want peace, this might be the way to move forward.
Well, let's talk about one of the most controversial elements of this, which is the land arrangement. What would be the borders here? The borders will be more or less the Bill Clinton proposed borders, which are pretty similar to all of the recent ideas. The Palestinian territories will include the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The problem is that the limits of East Jerusalem are currently disputed, but let's assume that they could conceptually be agreed upon and assume that there could be some kind of process worked out there. Jerusalem would become the capital of Israel for international purposes. West Jerusalem, that is. Many people may not know, within Israel, Jerusalem is considered the capital. Internationally, Jerusalem is not considered to be part of Israel, so Tel Aviv is the capital. I think the most pragmatic solution here is that Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, becomes the capital of Israel for international purposes. East Jerusalem becomes part of the Palestinian territories, the caveat being, and this is huge, that the Jewish quarter of the old city remains under Israeli sovereignty. This one point we could talk about for just an hour. It's a very complex situation, but if you go back and research the desecration of the Jewish quarter from 1949 to 1967, when it was not under Israeli control, you will immediately see why the Jewish quarter must remain under Israeli sovereignty. Israel must stop all settlement building immediately, and Israel needs to agree to remove settlements in principle. Now, it's, again, thinking pragmatically, some of those settlements you're not going to remove, Lewis, and you've been to Israel, you know what I'm talking about. I was recently there. When there are settlements that cannot practically be removed, you need to offer meaningful land swaps. Any settlement land needs to be made good on by exchanging other land. Yasser Arafat in the past said that he was conceptually open to meaningful land swaps for the settlements that couldn't reasonably be removed. Lastly, security. What happens with travel and movement in Israel, checkpoints, and the Gaza blockade? Palestinians have to stop all rockets immediately and all tunnel building immediately, and all tunnels must be destroyed, period. Okay? Hamas must demilitarize Gaza as part of a peace agreement. In the 2-year period after the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, but before the blockade was put in place, thousands of rockets were fired by Hamas. Hamas must demilitarize, Lewis. That is really a non-negotiable part of any potential peace deal.
Of course, that's necessary, but good luck with that.
In exchange, the Gaza blockade would be removed completely as long as no rockets and demilitarization and no tunnel building are held to. The Gaza blockade must be removed if we are going to have a productive peace deal. The key point of all this is whatever agreement is made, All claims must be renounced. This is the end of the conflict. This is very important because once you get both sides to say, this deal includes the renouncing of all past claims, you now have a framework which, if violated in the future, is the violation of an international agreement rather than, well, listen, we violated some kind of intermediate non-binding thing. It's not really that big of a deal. Both sides need to renounce all past claims. And that's what I see, Lewis, as what needs to happen.
Of course, I would bring up the question, what happens when one of these sides violates this agreement? What type of action is taken?
Yeah, well, everything goes back to exactly the way it is now and a horrible status quo, right? I mean, that I think is almost inevitable if such a hypothetical agreement were to be violated.
I think you've outlined some great stuff here, but Dave, there are so many hypotheticals, what ifs, and it's a stretch. We're reaching here.
If you have a disagreement with a particular point from my plan, email me and we'll continue to follow up on this. Let's take a break. Back after this with plenty more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I invite you to support the work of the David Pakman Show, support strong independent media by signing up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. Our members are the number one reason the program continues to grow. We put together a lot of great members-only perks, including a whole additional show that is just for our members. Check out samples and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership, where today's member of the day, Jeff Shaw, signed up one day not that long ago. Jeff, thank you for being a supporter of our program. Join Jeff at davidpakman.com/membership. Democrats on the House Select Committee on Benghazi have released a 100-plus page report which finds no evidence of wrongdoing by Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. They also released a ton of evidence that the Republican-led investigation was just a partisan sham. Even the former Speaker of the House candidate and current Republican Kevin McCarthy admitted that this was all about hurting Hillary Clinton recently. He's been denounced by fellow Republicans for that. 54 people have been interviewed by the Select Committee. And so far, according to this Democratic report, number one, no evidence that Hillary Clinton ordered the military to stand down the night of the Benghazi attacks. No evidence that Hillary Clinton approved or ordered a reduction of security in Benghazi. No evidence that Hillary Clinton pressed the U.S. into supporting a UN campaign in Libya under false pretenses. No evidence that Hillary Clinton oversaw an operation at the State Department to destroy embarrassing documents. No evidence that Hillary Clinton or any other U.S. official authorized the U.S. mission in Benghazi to transfer weapons from Libya to another country. Now, what about the politically motivated nature of the entire thing? Chairman Trey Gowdy is completely just in a sort of talking point coma, saying this has nothing to do with Hillary Clinton, but it obviously has everything to do with Hillary Clinton, Lewis, because number one, Exhibit A, panel after panel, investigation after investigation, committee after committee found no wrongdoing, and that they keep going. And Thursday, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will testify in front of this committee. And number two, this happened 14 times under George W. Bush, and no Republicans cared.
Well, they have to keep going because Hillary Clinton may be the next president. And so they really have no choice. This is politics in the United States. This is politics everywhere.
Will
right?
it backfire, though, in the sense that voters will punish Republicans for the stunt?
I don't think so. I think a large percentage of Republicans have been convinced that there was wrongdoing. So I don't think this will backfire at all.
I agree. And even getting people to think of the Benghazi thing as controversial. It doesn't even matter what the results of the panel are. Just getting people to think of it as a controversy attached to Hillary, that's a success for Republicans.
Yeah. Just the fact that there's an investigation going on and that they are talking about this and keeping it alive, it works against Hillary. So they're going to keep it going. This may not be the last investigation.
What has happened on the Republican presidential campaign side recently? More attention on the Democratic side. We had the debate last week, everybody trying to figure out who won the debate and who's leading in the polls. Yesterday, I told you that Republican candidate Ben Carson has suspended his campaign to go sell books. We have Donald Trump battling with Jeb Bush. We have Carly Fiorina's profile dropping again after she got some attention at the last debate. So where do things stand right now? There's a new CNN ORC poll which finds that Donald Trump and Ben Carson have now created some distance between them and the rest of the Republican field. Donald Trump polling at 27%, Ben Carson at 22%. Ben Carson has gained 8 points and is one of only 2 candidates, along with Donald Trump, to have over 20% support. In early September, we already had Trump and Carson as the top choices, and we still have that. About 2/3 of Republicans choose Trump or Carson as their first or second choices for the nomination. There is not a single other candidate, Lewis, that has made gains since the last CNN ORC poll, which was right after the last Republican debate. What has happened to Carly Fiorina? She's fallen apart. Lost 11 points in the last month, from 15% support to 4%, tied for 7th place. What happened to Carly Fiorina, Lewis? She made some headlines at the last debate and had gained some support, and she now is tied for 7th place.
I'll tell you what happened. That's the power of the media. How much attention have they been giving her? They're not focusing on her. It's all about Trump. It's all about Carson, mostly about Trump. And so if they don't give her airtime, Dave, she might as well not even exist.
Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and current Florida Senator Marco Rubio tied for 3rd place with 8% each. Here's something interesting. How satisfied are Republicans with the choices they have? There's 2 ways to see this. This new poll says 32% of Republicans are very satisfied with the group of candidates running for president on the Republican side. Sounds like a disaster, right? Not even 1/3 of the party is satisfied with the 15 or 16 choices that they have. But that number is up significantly from where it was in July, when only 23% of Republicans said they were satisfied. So it might not matter because Republicans are more enthusiastic than Democrats about voting this election. It might not matter because most Republicans plan to vote along party lines and they'll vote whoever is the eventual nominee anyway. But that number, 32%, like the choice, they are very satisfied with the choices they have. It's pretty low.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. But we're still talking about a lot of people here. And when you hear that many millions of Americans, like Donald Trump and Ben Carson as a president, you don't think too highly of them.
No, it's certainly very disturbing. It's a long race, a lot still to happen. The next debate is Wednesday, October 28th, next Wednesday, and we will, of course, have coverage of that. I mentioned a little while ago that there was a huge trial going on with an initial plaintiff against DuPont, arguing that DuPont knew that a chemical that's part of that nonstick Teflon coating could cause cancer. Our friend Mike Papantonio from Ring of Fire Radio, also an attorney at Levin Papantonio Law Firm in Pensacola, Florida, was representing the first victim. This was a bellwether case, meaning it is one plaintiff, in this case, selected by the defense, DuPont, for an initial trial. The verdict is now in from that bellwether case, and the jury awarded a cancer patient $1.6 million after finding that DuPont was liable for leaking a toxic chemical used to make Teflon into drinking water near one of its plants. A 3-week trial ensued in Columbus, Ohio. They found in favor of Carla Marie Bartlett, who's the first to go to trial among, listen to this, 3,500 plaintiffs who say they contracted one of 6 diseases linked to the chemical, which is known as PFOA, also known as C8. Now, jurors did not award punitive damages, finding that DuPont did not act maliciously. So now, Lewis, we are going to have 3,500 more cases. Remember, this was the case DuPont picked to go first, and it led to a $1.6 million verdict. We're looking here total at possibly hundreds of millions or even $1 billion in settlement money.
Yes, and DuPont can afford that, right? It's really not that big a deal for DuPont. And I predict there will be many settlements, moving forward after what we've just heard here.
The relevant question for the average person is, does Teflon cookware cause cancer? Should you avoid it? It's not really clear, right? I mean, it seems to be that if you don't disturb that nonstick coating, that Teflon pans are generally safe. You do have to be super careful, though. You only want to use plastic spatulas on nonstick coatings. If you scratch the coating with a metal spatula or a fork or a knife, you probably want to get rid of that. I plan on switching to stainless steel myself, Lewis.
Listen, let's not even get into those details. The point is that there is no possible way that having these nonstick pots and pans will do you any good. It can only be harmful.
Well, it'll help you in that your food won't stick.
Forget about that, Dave. Like I've said before, I use stainless steel and I don't have any problems, okay? The sticking is not an issue. Just don't be lazy. That's all. Just don't be lazy about your pots and pans. Just get something else. You'll be fine. Everything will be fine.
All right, that's my plan. When I move to Boston, I'm planning on getting stainless steel. So do you find, Lewis, you need to use a lot more oil or butter to prevent sticking with stainless steel?
No more than usual. And you know what? When you're done, put some of the soap in the pot or pan, put some water in it, and just let it sit for a little while, and everything will be okay.
All right. Lewis's blog today tackling the issue of cookware. So that's what's going on with the Teflon case. And we'll continue to follow it. I mean, just incredible. And the documents that Levin Papantonio uncovered in their prosecution of this case, just amazing. So we will take a break. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi. Stay with us on this Tuesday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Gerald Friedman, professor of economics at my alma mater, the economics department at the University of Massachusetts. So we all saw this Wall Street Journal article, which was very provocatively titled, and it pointed out the huge expense of all of Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders' ideas. And the article talked about what you had written regarding the cost of Bernie Sanders' proposals, but it was deceptive in that it only talked about the costs and not the savings. So let's start sort of at the very beginning. Talk to us about the analysis you did about Bernie Sanders' proposals.
Okay, well, I've done 2 analyses. The first, which is the largest program he has, is the single-payer national health insurance program. And that one accounts for $15 trillion in increased federal spending over the next 10 years. Then there are 7 other programs that he's proposed that come to $4 trillion over the next decade. Taking the healthcare one first, the article in the Wall Street Journal highlighted $15 trillion of spending. Oh my God, that's a huge number. But think of it this way. We pay for healthcare out of 2 checking accounts. One of them, the public sector, pays for about half of our healthcare spending. And over the next 10 years, through Medicare, Medicaid, the Veterans Administration, and various other programs, we'll be spending $20 trillion out of that bank account. The other bank account is, you could think of as private taxes that we pay the health insurance companies for healthcare. And over the next 10 years, that will be $20 trillion, for a total of $40 trillion coming out of our bank accounts. That's the money that we're spending on healthcare over the next 10 years. Now, if we adopted Bernie Sanders' proposal or something like it, we would be spending $35 trillion out of the first bank account instead of 20. That's where they get the $15 trillion. But we wouldn't be spending anything out of the other bank account. So in total, we would be saving $5 trillion over 10 years. And they want to highlight that we'll be spending more out of this bank account. But the real issue is that we're not spending as much on healthcare because the healthcare system would be more efficient. And in addition to spending less money, we would be covering everybody. And there would be no copays and no deductibles. So we would be getting better healthcare for everybody and saving $5 trillion.
Well, this is a sort of common technique that we often see by those who claim to be sort of amorphously about small government, which is they'll look at a program and they'll say, here's what it costs, and it ignores what it saves. And in my mind, it's sort of akin to saying, hey, it would cost me $1,000 to make my home more energy efficient. That's $1,000 more than I could be spending. And it ignores that maybe you'll save $50 a month on heating your home and you've got a 20-month payoff. It ignores one side of the ledger, so to speak.
Exactly the same for some of his other proposals, like infrastructure. We would be spending some more money up front on fixing the roads, improving airports, building mass transit, promoting solar energy. And then we would be saving money. Just retrofitting federal government buildings would cost money, would create jobs, and would save money, exactly like what you were talking about. To talk only about what we'll be spending without talking about the money we'd be saving, money that we would have spent otherwise, is, I find, misleading. The other proposals, by the way, would all the $4 trillion in extra spending for universal pre-K, college, etc., those would all be replacing other money that we're already spending and replacing some tax expenditures where we subsidize people to do things privately that the government would be taking on, and would generate more jobs and more economic growth and more tax revenue.
And when we look at programs like pre-K, for example, or more generally, government spending on education, there's the sort of savings we can measure in the way that you're talking about, but there seems to be a whole other area that's a little bit more difficult to quantify, which is the sort of savings via the positive long-term social impact of starting education earlier, or the long-term impact of, if we have universal pre-K, 20 years later, how many fewer people on welfare do we have as a result of jump-starting education? That I'm sure exists, but it's difficult to quantify, isn't it?
There is a literature on this because we've had Head Start for long enough that we've been able to follow kids who were in Head Start in the 60s and 70s and go along. And what you find is exactly what you say. Lower rates of crime, better jobs, better social outcomes, and less time spent on welfare. All of these are savings in the future. In my analysis, I only looked for 10 years. And I find that all of these programs will be producing, to varying degrees, less use of supplemental nutrition, food stamps, less welfare use, and more jobs and higher tax revenues, which actually makes up for about 40% of the extra spending, is immediately balanced, through reduced other forms of government spending and increased revenues.
So to much of our audience, it won't come as a surprise that government spending can often long-term actually be fiscally conservative, right? Budget neutral or budget negative.
Yeah, especially these days, because we still have a great deal of unemployment. If you compare the proportion of Americans who are working with out of the adult population with the proportion before the Great Recession started, we are short about 8 million jobs. That is a lot of suffering that's going on. When we talk about the government budget, it's great to talk about, well, we'll be able to pay for this, But it's even more important to talk about what are we doing to help the millions of Americans who are still suffering from the consequences of the bank meltdown in 2008.
Well, let me ask you about the sort of other side of the ledger, which is we've seen analyses done that show us how tax cuts for the rich actually increase the deficit. And that's a sort of very, very clear and concise analysis. Can you give us some other examples of policies that at their face claim to be examples of fiscal conservatism, but actually are quite the opposite in practice?
Well, if you flip over a lot of Bernie Sanders' ideas and you get the conservative counter to them, then you get exactly that. For example, cutting Head Start. Cutting Head Start is, saves you a few dollars now, but over the long term will lead to worse educational outcomes, worse jobs, higher rates of unemployment, higher rates of crime, higher rates of teen pregnancy, higher rates of welfare use. It costs you money if you don't educate people well. And the same for cutting back on President Obama's solar programs. These are programs including tax subsidies and some direct spending to promote solar energy. Well, if you don't do it with solar energy, then you do it with fossil fuels, and that leads to the loss of the state of Florida. It may seem fiscally prudent to not spend money on combating global warming, but if you do that, you'll be spending more money on heating through fossil fuels, and you'll be degrading the environment and raising the sea levels.
All right, setting the record straight on that Wall Street Journal piece about the cost of Bernie Sanders' proposals. We've been speaking to economist Gerald Friedman from the University of Massachusetts. It's always great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Hey, here's a really weird story. I got an email from a viewer saying, hey, David, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I bought a used drone off of eBay. It was faulty and I wanted to return it. The seller won't return my email, so I had to open a claim with PayPal, which I used to pay for the drone. It turns out the seller was Josh Duggar. I knew about the Josh Duggar scandal mainly from your show, and I noticed that the seller, Josiah Duggar, looked like a Christian name. I did some research, and the address is the address of Duggar family headquarters. Funny story, Josh Duggar totally ripped me off with the drone. He didn't mention the drone flies away and crashes when you use it outside. He's crashed it many times. Is the family getting desperate for cash? Maybe they'll be more desperate when I get a refund and they have to send someone to pick up the drone for me. So I asked for more information, and this viewer indeed sent me a screenshot of the receipt. The receipt lists the seller as Josiah Duggar, 548 Arbor Acres Drive in Springdale, Arkansas. I'm not giving away a secret address. This is widely known as the address of Duggar headquarters. How bad are things for the Duggars, Lewis, after the child pedophilia cover-up scandal and losing their TLC reality show, that Josh Duggar is now allegedly selling broken drones on eBay?
Well, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe he just had no means of repairing the drone and felt like ripping someone off. Well, morally.
That's the thing. If they don't need the money, I mean, their presumed net worth is of millions. These reality shows pay really well. They make a ton of money from the reality show. If they're not desperate for money at this point, which would suggest really bad, maybe 19 kids are just that expensive, or it suggests really bad money management skills. If it's just a goof to sell a broken drone to somebody over the internet, then that's also really disturbing.
It is. So either they're having money issues or Josh Duggar is a scumbag. Oh, wait, we already know he's a scumbag. So, either he just, I don't know, wanted to try and unload this because it's broken and he's wanted to rip someone off. I don't know if they're having money issues. Like you said, they are worth millions. I mean, how much could they have been spending? That's the question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. When you have 19 kids, I can't even do the math on that one, Lewis. I'd have to take out my protractor to figure that out. So if the Duggars want to comment on this broken drone scam that they have allegedly run, we are open to it. Very, very odd story. And I was just so surprised to see it. And indeed, all the facts appear to check out. Let me tell you a little story about a pharmaceutical CEO admitting the reality that their business is profit, not helping sick people. I'm not talking about Martin Shkreli. I'm talking about J. Michael Pearson, who's the CEO of Valeant Pharmaceuticals. Ring of Fire has turned their attention to this guy in the wake of the Martin Shkreli price gouging. Pearson's company is not in the business of curing disease. They're not in the business of easing suffering. They exist to make money for their shareholders, which the CEO acknowledges. He said, quote, "If products are sort of mispriced and there's an opportunity, we will act appropriately in terms of doing what I assume our shareholders would like us to do." Acting appropriately has apparently led to Valeant raising the prices on several drugs this year, in some cases as much as 800%. How are they justifying those price increases? They say they are, quote, "setting their prices on a range of factors, including clinical benefits and the value they bring to patients, physicians, payers, and society." There's also a stated concern about potential competition from generic versions that may come onto the market in coming months. Pearson is absolutely right, Lewis. He is just the messenger here. He is just stating the reality, which is a system where healthcare and medication are a for-profit business is a system that does not prioritize people's health. We knew that. He's just admitting what was so obvious to us.
Right. So the saying used to be necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Sure.
Well, I mean, it seems like profit now is why we have invention. So, of course, this is a very profitable business, Dave. It's all about making money. And you can look good while you're doing it if you make a drug that helps people.
And the counter argument, as I mentioned yesterday, is, hey, if it weren't for the profit motive, there'd be no incentive to develop medications. Untrue. I told you already yesterday, tons of development is happening at the nonprofit, foundational, and research organizations. The development is happening on the shoulders of the commons, including public school, the government structure, public utilities, the legal system, the judicial system, etc. This is why we don't want corporations running schools. This is why we don't want big corporations running jails or anything where the good of the individual should be the top priority. People's health is pretty close to the top of the list of stuff where we want the good of humans rather than profit to be the priority. And that's what the goal of medications should be.
Should be. And the goal of government, the goal of our defense system, our justice system, all of the above, Dave. But corporations have their hands in it all, and it's all about money.
Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's someone who called in with one idea about what is going on with Ben Carson. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David, I have a quick theory on Ben Carson. Do you think it's possible that he's autistic and maybe even a savant in the area of neurosurgery, which would explain all his other ridiculous comments? Just give me your thoughts, and I love the show. Have a great day.
Well, the caller is on to one thing, which is that within the field of medicine, surgery is often an area where those who have autism spectrum disorder do better because the interaction with patients and the sort of social situations that can be challenging are really limited in many ways. That being said, we have no evidence whatsoever that Ben Carson is autistic and that that's the explanation for how he could simultaneously be completely off of his rocker on most political issues, yet at the same time be a successful doctor, pioneering neurosurgeon. It's an idea that we are playing for you, but I don't know that we have any reason to think that that's the case.
I would doubt it, but it's an interesting theory.
On the bonus show today, skin art self-preservation, another idiotic good guy with a gun, and cigarette smoking in China. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up for the bonus show. This Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we will be sending out an email to everybody on our mailing list with an awesome membership special, a huge discount. We've only done this 2 times in the past. All you have to do to get that email is sign up for our mailing list at davidpakman.com. We'll speak to you on the bonus show in mere minutes.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.